In music, a tonic is a crucial part of a chord. It is the middle note that helps anchor down the highs and lows and creates a harmony. Here at the Tonic Accord, our goal is to be the tonic note in the political arena. We want to bring the right and left together for a discussion. A country needs a moderate and sensible center to bring the outer extremes together.
Welcome back to the Tonic Accord podcast. Today we will be discussing the recent drone strikes on a Saudi Arabian oil refinery, what that means for the global economy as well as foreign policy, and how Trump's new national security advisor is going to tackle this challenge as well as many others. Alex, how you doing, and how you been?
Drew, I'm doing well. Yeah, it's been about a week or two since we've talked, so it's nice to get back on here. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, You were just talking about how you're getting snow and I'm getting 90-degree weather down here in California. So same state, completely different parts.
Yeah, it's crazy how that works, right? Like, I literally couldn't go out 2 days ago because I wasn't just ready for the snow yet. I actually didn't bring a lot of cold weather clothing back from Spain. So I'm like, all right, I guess it's an inside book type of day. So then you're probably t-shirts and shorts, right?
Yeah, well, if it gets too hot, it's kind of an inside book day for me here as well. I just have the AC on. Speaking of hot weather, an oil refinery blew up in Saudi Arabia over the last weekend, and I have to imagine that was a pretty hot scene. So just to start on it, the world is trying to figure out who exactly did this. Houthi rebels based out of Yemen have claimed responsibility, but it seems like there are some Saudi Arabia as well as U.S. intelligence, including the White House, are a little bit more skeptical and think the buck lies all the way back with Iran. So that is one of the main issues that we're going to be covering, and that's all over the news today because, one, this oil refinery was one of the largest producers of oil in the world, and it's just this one drone strike has had a ripple across world oil prices as well as foreign policy in among Saudi Arabia and Iran. So first off, I want to hear your take. Do you believe it? Do you think it was the Houthi rebels out of Yemen? Do you think they were backed by Iran, or do you think it was Iran itself?
I've been going back and forth. I was actually just having dinner with my dad, and we were both talking about this exact topic. And, I think that we cannot outwardly blame Iran until it's certain it was them. But at the same time, I don't believe that the Houthi rebels have the infrastructure, the finance, or the supplies to have done this. I mean, just to start off with, the Houthis have repeatedly launched rockets, missiles, and drones at popular areas in Saudi Arabia, and they took out Aramco. Is that how it's pronounced? I believe so. And the Qutharis oil field was also hit. And I just see that, I mean, these are large-scale groups and large-scale infrastructure projects, and they hit at least 17 points at Saudi energy facilities from these strikes. And I just don't particularly see how the Yemeni Houthis could actually be responsible for this.
Right.
Just because I don't know if they have the infrastructure to do it, and it's been clear that Iran's been supporting the Houthis for quite a long period of time. And I just don't really know yet. But the problem is that I think this could be maybe the beginning of escalation no matter what, because it's been clear that the United States and Saudi Arabia and other regional allies, including Israel, we've all been sort of looking for a reason to get back at Iran. And even if they're not involved, I feel like we're going to get involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree that like the Houthi rebels, they claim that it was them. If it was, I have to imagine it was at the help of Iran because, when we're talking about drone strikes, for anyone that's not too familiar, these are not the drones you get at Walmart. These are not the drones you get at Best Buy, right? These are military grade drones that get up to the size of like full-fledged planes. So they're carrying missile payloads, and this is multiple. So Saudi Arabia and the U.S. are looking and investigating the wreckage of multiple of these drones. So this was a we're talking, I don't know the exact number. I have to imagine we're talking, 6 or more military level missile drones. So that kind of capability and technology, as well as that kind of coordinated attack, it does seem a little outside the scope of a rebel group in the Middle East. We've seen rebel groups, similar rebel groups, carry out bombings and car bombings and, big bombings. But as far as drone technology, that's usually the realm of established military governments.
Yeah.
So, it does seem a little sketchy. It does seem a little like, Iran may be using the Houthis as a fall guy. But we don't know for sure. The suggestion is that the U.S. and Saudi Arabia believe it's Iran, but there's no hard evidence. Some nations across the world have expressed skepticism that it was Iran. Japan just recently said that they don't believe it was Iran. They believe it was they believe it was the Houthi rebels on their own accord. I don't know how much weight that really carries in Middle Eastern politics because Japan's not nearly as invested as the United States. But we'll see. It looks like the investigation is happening. The president has tweeted about it kind of vaguely that he says, we have an idea of who did it, but we're waiting for the kingdom to kind of give us more information in the go ahead as far as how we want to tackle this. Interesting that that's where we're at. But as far as your point on escalation, if this is Iran, then yeah, I mean we're really starting to enter the territory of the beginnings of a war. Frankly,
Yeah.
I heard, unfortunately I forget his name, but there was an ex-foreign policy advisor who left the Trump administration after they withdrew troops out of Syria. But he was on NPR this morning, and he was talking about how he does believe it's Iran, and he believes it's Iran because of our tight sanctions on them. It's almost as if they're throwing a fit. They're saying that, well, if you're going to put sanctions on us and keep us, locked out from the global economy as much as we are, then we're going to cause problems. We're going to cause trouble. And they've never been friends with Saudi Arabia. So this is just one way that they can throw a fit and cause trouble as kind of a reaction to sanctions.
Yeah, I actually wanted to go off that. I think that's a really good point. And the New York Times actually just came out today with a quote from Ali Vaez. I hope I'm getting that name right. He's the head of the Iranian project at the International Crisis Group. And he said that Iran wants to show that instead of a win-lose contest, Iran can turn this into a lose-lose dynamic for everyone. And it's very easy for them to do this, which is why I think that there's going to be escalation no matter what. Because you said, if it turns out to be Iran, then it's going to be an easy, argument for escalation. But even if it isn't Iran and we think it's Iran, I think that's going to be good enough for a lot of world leaders. Because it looks like this is going to lead to, according to Market Watch, a shutdown that could lead to about 50% of oil production being at least temporarily thrown offline in Saudi Arabia. And the prominent crude oil strategist in the Middle East said that the drone strike was a big deal that could result in a major spike in crude oil prices. And the scariest part is that it was estimated that the attack knocked out 5.7 billion barrels of daily oil production, or 5% of the world's daily crude production. So no matter what, even if it's Iran or not, the thought that it is Iran by anyone, and the fact that it is going to directly impact our oil reserves, our economies, and just the world energy system, I think is enough for a lot of people to say we need to do something about it. And I wanted to say something really quick on the Japan thing you said. I hate to say it, but I don't trust. I really don't. I would not trust Japan's opinion on it, considering since World War II they don't actually have a foreign intelligence committee or a military. So I know they have diplomacy, but I would not probably say that I would trust a lot of their intel, especially when NPR reported that U.S. surveillance satellites detected Iran readying drones and missiles at launch sites right before these oil facilities were attacked.
Right.
No,
I don't give Japan their opinion on this much weight either. I just wanted to give an example of, not everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
But no, you're right. I happen to believe it was Iran, or at least it was Iran, giving the drones to the Houthis and saying, basically holding their hand as they pulled the trigger. Um, so, yeah, it's one of those things, right, where it was an attack on Saudi Arabia. Right, it was an attack on Saudi Arabia, but it is an attack on a global oil supply that is intended to affect everyone else. So it's how do we view this, right? As how much do we want to get involved? Getting involved in the Middle East in general is not that popular, I don't think, in the United States, but sometimes
Right.
it's necessary. And I think that Iran is almost, like you said, they're a lose-lose situation. They're almost kind of pushing for a fight. They're kind of egging us on. So I think that if we were to take action, I always talk about this anytime we talk about taking action against a foreign nation, is you have to have a coalition and you have to be on the same page with your allies, because that's the only way to get, a strong message across and to be effective. And so I hope that the White House is willing to, talk to allies in Europe and other allies in the Middle East, and maybe even strengthen sanctions on Iran as a punishment. I'm not, but it's tough, right? It's tough. I did know that Trump decided to to release some of the strategic oil reserves in the United States because of the massive loss of oil supply. So hopefully that'll kind of counteract the the price increase that we see. I think that was actually kind of a smart move.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see how this plays out. And I mean, especially if we start to see this happen again, or in a different way, maybe not an oil refinery, but other drone strikes that are obviously, basically an act of war, then yeah, we might seriously have to consider some military action against Iran.
Yeah, so I think you first off, so there's two things I want to bring up. And first, you touched on it really well. I think you brought up a great point, is coalitions. Uh, that is going to be essential. When the United States invaded Iraq following 9/11 in 2002, we had a large coalition of many Western allies, and it took that. And it was a bold scope of people that saw us attacked and worked together to stop a very, very real threat of terrorism. I think that some world leaders right now, especially Emmanuel Macron, I think they are hoping that diplomacy and discussion will still work, because Macron said I think he said yesterday, that he hopes the meeting of the United Nations General Assembly, which opens on Tuesday, will still be an opportunity for de-escalation between the United States and Iran. Because remember, I think we talked about this after the G7, is that Trump, now he's stepped back on it, but he did say that he was willing to meet with Rouhani, I guess the president, even though he doesn't make all the decisions, as you know. But Trump was willing to meet with him. And I think a lot of Western leaders are still hoping that's going to happen. But at the same time, I don't see it happening, because Khamenei has now ruled that out, saying Iran will only speak to the Americans if the U.S. backs off and repents and implements the nuclear deal. And I guess what they're saying right now, and back to what I was saying, is how they want to create a lose-lose situation, to me, shows that Iran is doing this, and it's all strategical. And the thing is, if they don't want to talk unless we bring back the nuclear deal and lift sanctions, Macron and other Western allies want us to talk to Iran. And I think eventually we're going to have to just talk to them. But unfortunately, the situation seems to be growing out of control so quickly that I don't see how that's going to be possible. And what worries me the most is that Trump has said he's waiting on what bin Salman and the Saudi military thinks we should do. It's again, his backtracking and listening to probably leaders that I don't think have our best interests at heart. And unfortunately, he wants to get the next step from the Saudi military and Prince Salman, which I don't think is a good idea.
Yeah, I agree. And formally, the U.S. does not have any defense treaty with Saudi Arabia, right? So even though, yeah, we shake hands with them a lot, it's not like this is like an attack on France or the UK, where we do have defense treaties with. We aren't obligated by any treaties to aid the Saudi Arabians. I also believe the Saudi Arabians understand that, They probably are pretty pissed off, no doubt. But I think they understand that a full-on war with Iran, I mean, they're right there, right? We can send drones over and send troops, far away from the homeland, but they're right there. I think they understand that if they go in a full-fledged war with Iran, it's bad for everyone in the region. Like you said, it's a lose-lose situation. You're kind of right that Iran is in the position where they don't have much to lose. They're already the loser. They're, what they used to be shipping out 2.5 million barrels of oil a day. Now they're down to 500,000 because of global sanctions. And their economy is getting strangled. Not as quickly as we would have liked, but it definitely is getting affected. And so, yeah, they're kind of we don't have nothing to lose, might as well go for it standpoint. I think that's what we're seeing here. I hope that discussions will happen, but there's not a snowball's chance in hell the Trump administration is going to repent and sign the nuclear deal. That's just not going to happen. I even think even if you had a Democrat take office in 2020, there might be a greater chance of a new Iran deal, but it's not going to be some kind of groveling and repentance that I think people might expect. I just don't think that's happening. We're almost it's too late now, right? Like I originally have stated before that I don't think we should have left the Iran deal in the first place. But now that years later, now that we're seeing that they were going against some of the agreements that we laid out, and now that they're doing drone strikes on oil refineries, it's almost a little too late, right? It would have to be a new deal. It wouldn't be the old one again. I don't think that's ever going to happen again.
I completely agree. And it's I guess the one thing I want to ask you about, because I was thinking about this right now, actually, just looking through a few of the notes I have, and I wonder, do you think there's a diamond in the rough to this whole thing that, like you said, I don't really see us reneging on pulling out of the Iran deal, and I don't really see Iran and Saudi Arabia becoming friends, but do you maybe think this is going to cause the West, and hopefully especially the United States, to look more at this Yemeni civil war that has been one of the most brutal humanitarian problems that's happened probably in the last 20 years?
I mean, I do, right? I don't think it'll be in a good way. I think it'll be, how do we eliminate the Houthi insurgency? But I don't think it'll be a human rights based kind of outlook. I think it'll just be a purely, foreign policy, military based kind of look. I mean, it might have the alternate effect of helping the situation for the innocent people in Yemen, but just because we go in there and fight an insurgent force doesn't mean it makes the country any better. We've seen that time and time and again. I mean, look at Afghanistan.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, it does bring more attention to Yemen, but I still think the United States' eyes are on Iran, even if it is the Houthis, right? I think we still follow the money back. It'll go back to Iran, either way, and that's what our focus will be.
Yeah, I just can't reiterate enough how I cannot there's not really a bone in my body that thinks the Houthis did this indirectly. I think we just need to find out if it was Iran solely or if they've just been escalating their arms they've been giving to the Houthis, because just based on the crisis in Yemen and the dire situation where it has one of the biggest famines and cholera outbreaks in the last 200 years, I could not imagine that the Houthi rebels have enough to actually get any of this done. I really just can't believe it. I mean, this crisis has actually in some ways made Syria look like a walk in the park. And I don't want to say that lightly.
Right. Well, it's also what would be the motive? I mean, you're already in such a desperate situation in Yemen, and then you bomb Saudi Arabia at its most profitable refinery. It's like, okay, well, what's going to happen next? Like, you're just going to get retaliated against by Saudi Arabia, and now you're worse off. Like, I don't understand the motive other than like a revenge thing, which I don't think, again, like we've stated, I don't think they even have the capabilities to do. I think if it was the Houthis, which again we'll find out, and we're both skeptical of, if it was, it would have to be because Iran gave them the drones, told them to do it, told them to take responsibility, and maybe they were providing arms or food or on the back end, right? It would be a deal. But yeah, it just doesn't seem right that an already famished and downtrodden rebel group would, carry out a massive drone strike on a global power, or a regional power, that is. And,
right.
For no reason. Like, it's strange.
Right. So what do you? I was also talking to my dad about this over dinner. I know Trump's administration is looking to intensify sanctions against Iran as a repercussion. Do you think that sanctions go far enough if this was Iran? I know Lindsey Graham, many Democrats, many Republicans have all said this is not enough because, again, sanctions only hurt the people.
Yeah, I saw that the U.S. military advisors have other suggestions, including counter like drone strikes against their oil refineries. I think that's going to escalate things a lot. I don't know if I would do that, but they also recommended cyber war. So you would do hack some of their security systems, hack their government websites, do things that are obviously targeting the government in Iran and less the people. So I don't know, because sanctions, right? Sanctions is kind of what got us here. So I don't know if more of that, and not that I'm totally against sanctions. I actually think sanctions are a very can be an effective way to pressure a country to do something without violence. But I think in this case, right, we already have the sanctions, and that's what led them to do this. So I think a different approach might be the way to go. I personally like the idea of cyber sabotage. It's something that the people, the average day-to-day Joe, for lack of a better term, in Iran's not going to feel the effects of, but the higher ups in the military absolutely will. If their satellites stop working and their radar stops working and their infrastructure within all their computers and their whatever data centers is shut off, that would definitely affect the Iranian government. So I think that's a way to do it. I mean, gosh, it seems like everyone else in the world is doing that. So in one way or another. So I think that's one way to go about it.
Yes, yes, and I think that's a good point because we learned, I think, after the first Gulf War, when we invaded Iraq after Saddam Hussein invaded the oil fields of Saudi Arabia, right? We learned that all this does is escalate a crisis. So, and obviously, I think in this modern scope of events in this modern landscape, I don't really see obviously ground forces working. We don't need another 15-year war. And yeah, like you said, sanctions can work. I think we talked about this in the Amazon episode, where if it's a democratic system, I think sanctions work when you put pressure on the elites. But again, we're in a very different system in Iran.
Yes.
Iran is not very democratic, so I don't think it would hurt the uppers. It would just hurt the people. And so you're right. Let's hit them where they're basically needing a lifeline to do this. I mean, it's been drone strikes. It's been cyber attacks. It's been X, Y, and Z linked to that. So I think you're right. A cyber attack is important, but I still wonder if Iran is in a lose-lose scenario and they're already up against a wall. What do they do next then? What do they do next if their back is against a wall? There's sanctions on them. There's cyber attacks. They are losing a. They're just losing a large battle. What do they do next at that point then? Because I personally don't see any other outcome for this except for sitting down and talking. And I know that sounds so cliche because I usually do believe that there are times when military action is needed. And I think you're right, cyber attacks could work, but at the end of the day, like I think Macron said it right, is that we need to work on still talking because if they're already losing, if they're already losing, I don't know what I don't know what. Yeah.
No, I agree. I think that like the cyber attacks and stuff, it would be so that to bring them to the table,
right?
To bring them to the table, be like, all right, what do we do to end this? I hope that the Trump administration is willing to talk to them. We've seen in the past Trump is willing to talk with people that aren't normally people the United States talks with. That can be good and bad, but I think overall that's pretty good. And I think that in this scenario, yeah, you're right. We're going to have to eventually sit down and talk to Iran. It just depends on, who has the most leverage when we get there. And I don't know. I mean, we'll have to see. I think the ball is in our court currently, right? But we're obviously going to have to take some actions. Trump has talked about increasing sanctions on over a tweet. We'll see how that actually manifests. But if you do have increased sanctions and perhaps like cyber attacks, then the ball's going to be back in Iran's court. I think if you have another big attack like this, that's easily traceable to Iran. Or if you have any kind of serious loss of life with the 5,000 U.S. troops in Iraq based on due to Iran, I think we're going to have to start getting a little bit tougher. I mean, think about it, right? The Trump administration claims that their policy on Iran is maximum pressure. Well, if that's really the case, then we got to put the pressure on. I mean, especially if they're starting to do stuff like drone strikes or threaten American lives. I think at a certain point you would have to start doing things like drone striking their satellite operations, drone striking their oil refineries. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point because that's a very dangerous game. But I think that if they are unresponsive to sanctions and cyber wars and they're unwilling to get to the table, eventually we're going to have to really step up our game. That's just the reality. I mean, that's just the reality. You can't threaten maximum pressure, but then only use sanctions over and over if they don't work. If they start to work, then by all means, let's avoid any conflict if we can. But at the end of the day, you have to stamp your foot down.
Yeah, and I think on that point, I mean, I think the elephant in the room for me is basically we seem to be listening to Saudi Arabia ever since Trump has been in office. It's clear that he works hand in hand. He gets along with MBS very well. He's defended MBS over Khashoggi, and it's clear that we are big allies with this Trump administration. And so I don't know if anything other than eventual conflict is what Saudi Arabia does want. I think you're right that they don't want a big conflict, but I think they want retaliation. And I wanted to bring up a point which I don't think a lot of people know is that Aramco, the company that was the main one bombed by, I'll just say for now, whoever it was. It's a Saudi Arabian national petroleum company, but it actually started as as California Arabian Standard Oil in 1933. So it's always been a California Saudi Arabian joint company that now is headquartered in Saudi Arabia, but it's always been. It was one of the companies that has been involved in Texas oil, California oil, and several other states for a long time. And so basically the U.S. has a very large stake in this company. And I think it was actually bought by the Saudis. I would have to look that up, so don't take that for solid. But I think it was started as an American company that was bought by the Saudis. And so basically the thing is we have mutual interest in this problem. And so I'm not really sure if, especially Trump's Mr. Money, 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 and we sell a lot of money to Saudi Arabia. Not a lot of money, a lot of weapons to Saudi Arabia. I don't really know. I think Saudi Arabia has the upper hand in the decision making here.
Yeah, it is interesting, right? I mean, Donald Trump, even before he was president, had financial ties with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabians own the 45th floor of his New York tower, and so there's definitely some less than ideal financial ties with Saudi Arabia, and the whole Khashoggi thing, and the fact that Jared Kushner visits Saudi Arabia constantly and is all buddy. Right. I mean, we do have to remember what we're dealing with, right? When we talk about, a response to our interests, I mentioned it before, this isn't France. This isn't the UK. These aren't our allies that we fought the Nazis with. This is Saudi Arabia. This is a country that has a terrible human rights record and is only at the current status it has because of its oil. So, do we really have to go out of our way to protect their interests? I don't think so. But we do have to consider who is the regional power in the Middle East, and it can't be Iran because, I don't know, it's just this weird thing, right? Because Saudi Arabia and Iran are both guilty of funding terrorist rebel groups and are both guilty of being subversive and anti-democratic. Mm-hmm. We just happen to do a lot of business with one of them. So it's just such a strange scenario. But
and that's why I brought up that Aramco solution, is because I think we, unfortunately, both of us have mutual interest in these oil fields, and Yeah, I mean, even though you're right, it's a very shallow relationship we have with Saudi Arabia. I mean, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole too much, but there are a lot of reports that do say the Saudis, were very involved in 9/11. Why did we let over a dozen of them flee the country right after 9/11?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. There's a lot of interesting stuff, but the fact is that we don't need anything from Iran, and we need Saudi Arabia.
I do think it's telling, though, when the president starts talking about how we're waiting for the kingdom to let us know what's up.
Yeah.
And it's like, look, man, the attack was on Saudi Arabia, but, like, you need to be focusing on American interests. I mean, he's a guy, if he's so America first, then, like, figure it out. America first, right? Like, screw Saudi Arabia. Like, yeah, this is an attack on our interests, but think of it that way. Don't be waiting for the kingdom to, like, let you know what's going on. Figure it out for ourselves. Listen to our intelligence community. Talk to our allies that are actually our allies and have our interests at heart, which is like the Western European democracies, and Australia and others.
Yeah, I mean, I think America first is really Trump first.
Yes, well, yes, I think that's correct. Yeah, and it's in Trump's best interest to be buddy with the Saudis.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, speaking of Trump first, Mr. Bolton kind of lost his. Let's just say he wasn't very popular with a lot of the Trump administration. A lot of people had a lot of trouble talking to him. I think it was a little bit over a week ago that he was released,
right?
Or he resigned. Trump said he fired him. The typical. And Bolton was actually pretty hawkish towards Iran. He didn't really trust Iran. And so he's gone, and there's a new guy, Robert O'Brien. What have you heard about him, Drew? Because I've heard mixed things about him.
Yeah,
to say the least.
This is a lot of people are considering him a low profile guy. I hadn't heard of him before this, so take that as you will. I mean, to me at least, he's low profile. But he used to be the head of the hostage negotiations in the State Department. Which is honestly just, side note, that sounds like a pretty cool job. That sounds like a pretty badass job. Probably stressful though. But so he is now selected to be Trump's fourth national security advisor following John Bolton. And recently he's made kind of a little wave because he was sent over to Sweden when the rapper A$AP Rocky was locked up for assault. That became, Trump tweeted about it, and he went over there to just kind of preside and watch over the court hearing and make sure everything was going on fair, which it was. I think, side note, I think Sweden had every right to prosecute A$AP Rocky for assault because it was assault. I see A$AP Rocky's back now because he served time in jail waiting for the trial, and they consider that adequate time for his crime. Pretty minor stuff. He left. He's back in the United States making music, doing his thing. All's well and good. But that's one of the at least higher profile instances where people may have heard of Robert O'Brien. Other than that, he's been pretty low key, but pivotal as far as working with multiple secretaries of state, including Hillary Clinton, Condoleezza Rice. He served in the Bush administration. So this guy's been around. He's been established in the federal government, but he's just not really one that is a high profile and a name that people recognize. And I think that's exactly what Trump wants.
Yeah, and I think that's a good summary. You and I might have our disagreements on A$AP Rocky. Maybe that's a little discussion down the road. We'll see.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, actually, I guess I'm not overly disappointed with this. I think that Bolton was somewhat disastrous. I actually agreed in some ways about the disagreement him and Trump had over the Taliban. I don't think the Taliban should have been invited to the White House.
No.
They're not willing to work with the Afghani government. They're responsible for, I don't even know the number, but numerous lives. And Bolton pretty much said that we should not let them here, and Trump didn't agree with that. And so actually, I probably think Bolton was more pragmatic than people give him credit for. He was a war hawk. But I think that we do maybe need someone low profile to work with Trump. My only issue with O'Brien here is that he's kind of a yes man. And I go back to this all the time, is that yes men are not good for people like Trump.
Yeah.
And Trump has had a yes man his entire life. He's been surrounded by yes men. And people like him, strong leaders, good leaders, need people around them that are no but people. People that say, I don't think that's a good idea, but there's some strengths. Let's work off of that. And unfortunately, most of the no but people, as I called them, are all gone in the administration. It was like Mattis, Tillerson,
Right.
McMaster, all those people that like, no, Trump, but we can work off that. I think they're all gone. And at this point, it's clear that Trump wants to run national security. He wants to be our diplomat in chief, which I guess is his job. And so at this point, you know what? Maybe it's better. Maybe there's going to be less tension in the White House.
Yeah, I think, you definitely don't want a scenario where your national security advisor and your president are always at odds, right? That doesn't lead to a well-oiled machine. But you can't also just have the machine be driven by one guy and one guy alone. Like you said, right? If he still had a group of guys and gals around him that were a little bit more pragmatic, a little bit less, tweet oriented and, rhetoric oriented, then Robert O'Brien just, fits into his position and does what he needs to do. But since those kind of checks and balances within the State Department and the security apparatus are not there, then you basically have Trump and a yes man, and that's a dangerous combination. I agree. I think, I don't know. He's also, the few times that O'Brien has shared his opinion, he was against the Iran deal. He thinks Iran is the largest threat to the Middle East, which is, a pretty fair argument. But one of the things that I'm actually worried about is O'Brien's opinions on the United Nations. He's the few times he's spoken up, he's been pretty against the UN. He retweeted someone about saying that the UN was just a bunch of dictators coming to America telling us how we're not as good as them. And it's like, all right, man, like that's kind of a poor representation of the UN. Look, it's not a perfect thing. I don't think anyone believes that, but to see a global body that's trying to deliberate on an international level, to see that so negatively is a little bit troublesome in my eyes.
That's a good point. Unfortunately, it fits the mold of a lot of people left in the Trump administration. The UN, just like a study came out that I think it said well over 30% of Europeans don't know what the Holocaust is. I think a large number of Americans don't understand why we're in NATO and the UN.
Right.
I think it's a problem throughout the world for different reasons. People are forgetting why we have alliances. They're forgetting history, and they're forgetting that the 20th century was a huge time of change. It was a huge time of revolution, and it was a huge time of Holocaust. I think there were 3 or 4 Holocausts in the 20th century.
Yeah.
Technically Holocausts. And I think we need to realize is that nothing's perfect, but the U.S. has a good impact in the world in many ways. There's a lot of controversy in others, but I like the fact to know that there are countries that when we were attacked after 9/11, that went to bat with us, no questions asked.
Right.
And so I also think that there's a symptom amongst the media and maybe even us at some extent, is that whenever Trump brings in someone else that gets along with him and is quiet, it just seems like someone that he wants because they're a hack. And this guy was a U.S. hostage negotiator. And like you said, he has experience in diplomacy. And maybe it's better that he's a lesser of a personality, because John Bolton was pro-Iraq. He was a Fox News war hawk basically for the last 10 years, and I'd be kind of okay if maybe we see what happens before we just jump on this guy's opinions, because as we know, even Bolton has backtracked on some of his opinions since when he was in the White House, because it's easy to be a commentator or a figure or someone who's not working in it and saying what you think. And once you get in there, you kind of have to go with the ebb and flow.
Yeah, well, I don't think he's a hack, right? He's definitely established himself in multiple administrations as a capable member of the security apparatus, of course. I just worry about I just worry that his opinions on the UN combined with Trump's, right? Like, we're getting farther away from a coalition of international friends where, especially with what we just talked about with Iran, we need to be getting closer to a coalition with our international friends. So that's my one worry. But you're right. I mean, compared to the war hawk that is Bolton, perhaps O'Brien is more of a level-headed pragmatist. I mean, obviously, if you're in hostage negotiations, you can't be some fiery, like hostage negotiations are all about tact and nuance. So he does have that going for him. And I am willing to give him, some time to see if he can prove himself. I think the larger context of who Trump appointed is more worrisome than O'Brien himself, because we still have over a dozen major positions that are unfilled and have interim heads, right? And Trump is getting, like you said, getting rid of all the people that fought back against him a little bit, and now he's surrounding himself with yes men. It's just a little worrisome that like the checks and balances within the executive branch are now gone.
Yeah, and this is kind of a little side note on that, but I think you addressed it well. Is the bigger issue is that we are turning a blind eye on our bureaucracy in the United States. I read a book called The Fifth Risk earlier this summer, and it was just basically about how one of the biggest risks facing the U.S. and a democracy in general is undervaluing important institutions. For example, like the Department of Commerce runs NOAA and other weather groups, and for example, they've underfunded them. The Trump administration has sent barely half the people they needed to run a large majority of these organizations. And it's not a risk that we face directly. But in 10 years, what happens when NOAA can't predict tornadoes as well as they used to be?
Right.
Or these nuclear storage facilities we have in Oregon don't have the proper protection or the proper scientists running them. It's these buildup of risks when we turn our blind eye on bureaucracy. And I think you're right, I think that'll be the historic problem with the Trump administration, is they've undervalued the day-to-day bureaucracy, and they've politicized it basically.
Right, or the EPA completely disregarding its original intention.
Exactly.
To protect the environment, and it's now supporting large industries. Yeah, no, there's a lot of that. That's a whole other discussion. But yes, yeah, you're right. I think Pat O'Brien on his own, or Robert O'Brien on his own is not so bad of a pick. But it's just the whole thing, right? The fact that we have a kind of a failing bureaucracy that doesn't have much direction, and that Trump is surrounding stuff with yes men. It's going to have a lasting impact past this administration.
Yes,
but we'll see. We'll see. He has to take on Iran, but he also has to figure out what's going on with North Korea, Venezuela, and of course, the Taliban and Afghanistan. So he's got some large challenges ahead of him, and but we, I think I can talk for both of us that we do wish him the best, and we do wish that he's successful.
Yeah, I do. I completely agree. Quick 5 minutes before we're out of here. I would just, speaking of politicizing institutions, Brett Kavanaugh is back in the news. It's actually been almost about a year, right, since Christine Blasey Ford testified.
Right.
And Brett Kavanaugh gave that fiery rebuttal.
Yes.
And it looks like there's a new book coming out, and the New York Times shared some of it. The book is called The Education of Kavanaugh, an Investigation. And it basically highlights, I think, 3 cases of women who have, at once or some other point in their life, been in contact with Brett Kavanaugh. But the big case is Deborah Ramirez, who actually was one of the accusers last year, but no one could corroborate her story, so it kind of fell off the map. And it looks like the New York Times is now again going into a moment at a party where Brett Kavanaugh might have done some lewd acts, had her grab his penis, and other heinous acts while drunk. But unfortunately, Deborah Ramirez, who is intoxicated, there are questions if rather it was him, it was blurry memory, because none of her friends, I believe, that were at the party could confirm or deny. What do you think about this, man? Do you think it's too late to go after this, or what?
It's never too late, right? I don't really believe that, especially at such a high office like the Supreme Court, there's no statute of limitations, right? If someone has some serious dark past that needs to be addressed. Well, and also I think the main thing is if he lied about it, because if he's claimed that he's so innocent and he's been lying, then that's obviously a gross infraction against everything the Supreme Court stands for. But I think it needs to be investigated further. I've heard that the FBI People are claiming that the FBI did not dig deep enough into some of these stories, and there's criticism of the FBI as far as like, basically half-assing some of their investigations and not looking at some other factors. Honestly, I really can't speak to how accurate that is. I don't know all the details. I think it's one of those things, though, that like, should we just go off of a book? No, but should it give us maybe enough? Should it give us maybe the thought to, okay, maybe let's reopen this and dig a little further? Then yeah, I think so. It's a serious accusation, and especially with the current climate, the cultural climate, I think it'd be wise for everyone to take this seriously. But and let the chips fall where they may. If it's not enough to really prove that anything happened, then that's the reality. If it is, and Brett Kavanaugh has been lying about it, then I do think he should be removed from the Supreme Court. But I just don't know the details.
Yeah, the interesting, because you brought up the cultural climate, and I first want to say yes, I completely agree with you that it should be taken seriously, and people should look into it more. But I almost feel like the way the New York Times produced this and the way the book has been written is it kind of puts Kavanaugh as a guilty until proven innocent because he was a privileged white male who went to a prestigious university. It basically kind of paints a tale of two people, because I read a few excerpts from it, and it paints this Deborah Ramirez, as a working class girl who worked her way there. She was Catholic and waiting till marriage to have sex. And then Kavanaugh was this, white boy who got in there and just enjoyed himself and took advantage of Harvard's system. And obviously, like you said, I don't know the whole story, but I do feel like there seems to be a bias kind of looking more at the system than what actually Kavanaugh did. And I kind of wonder if that's a good enough reason, since it hasn't been corroborated and no one has really been able to come out and say specifically it was Kavanaugh. It kind of looks like it's more biased against someone like Kavanaugh, because it's true. There's male privilege, there's white privilege, and it's easier for these people to get through these colleges like Yale. And so I think they're using that bias in a certain extent to paint him as just this quote unquote shitty rich guy who was able to do what he wanted.
Yeah. I can definitely see that happening. And again, right, it's we have to go back to it's kind of I'm kind of a cynic as far as like what's the point of the book, right? It's to sell copies. What's the point of the New York Times? It's to get clicks. So there is an element of that. I absolutely think we need to take stories seriously, but if we do investigate and there is no corroboration, then that's kind of where it ends. So yes, I do believe that there has to be some due process. I don't think someone's guilty until proven innocent. It definitely should be the other way around. But I've just heard about this FBI not investigating some of the stories as deeply as they should, and I just wonder about that. Again, I don't know all the details, so I'm not going to go on a limb and say that is true or not. But if we'll have to see. But I really don't think people should make their their absolute decisions on someone just based off of a book that has not been corroborated. So, as far as where it stands currently, then yeah, I would just need to hear more info. I would just need to get more, and I think people should do more digging. But until then, innocent until proven guilty.
The last thing I have to say, it's fast, and it's more of a kind of question / discussion to you, is where it kind of comes back to this whole Me Too movement in general, is how far does someone have to go before they can redeem themselves? You know what I mean? Obviously, if he lied last year in front of this hearing, then it's one thing. But say someone like him does do something like this when they're 15 years old, or I think, what was he, 15 or 17? I don't have it here, but because also that same New York Times book talks about how since he apparently did this, over the next 35 years, he was popular with female law clerks. He helped female people all around him get better. He was very big in his family and his community. It's like, how far does someone have to go for redemption? You know what I mean?
I think that varies person by person of what redemption means, if that's even possible. I have to imagine, though, that if he really did commit some of these very atrocious acts, that the people that were the victims had to live with that for the rest of their lives. Especially to see him become in a place of power, it's probably even more traumatizing. So, like, there has to be some restitution, right? Like, I think that if it were true, even if he was truthful about it the whole time, I think he should. I think he should leave the Supreme Court. I don't think he should be at that level of power and success and veneration and respect in history if he's been responsible for basically tormenting women. Even if he's, was nice from then on, I mean, I don't know. It's a really tough question, and I don't think I have the right answer. But
Me neither.
It's going to vary by anyone you ask. Like, what does redemption mean? Is it possible? I bet you some people would say no, throw him in jail for the rest of his life, and some people would say it was a long time ago and he was just a kid. I don't know. I really don't know. What do you? Yeah, what do you think?
I think like you said, it varies by degree, but I've unfortunately seen, and I'm not disregarding or going against the Me Too movement by any means, but I've seen it's kind of intensified as it's gone on, and there really hasn't been any space for people to, seek retribution or seek steps towards redemption. I agree with you. I mean, you do something, there should be punishment. But I mean, like, especially in comedy now, you see so many guys that have done something. I mean, I'm not talking about Harvey Weinstein. I think he should rot in jail. I think that's pretty agreeable. But you have other cases like Louis C.K., who was a creep and did things, and he's admitted it. But does it mean we shun him forever? Or are there steps to redemption? And I think there should be. I think it needs to vary by the person. But I think there needs to be these steps to let people get back into society. I mean, if you commit a crime like, I don't know, robbing a bank or, I don't know, selling drugs, you're locked up or you pay the crime, but eventually there is a way to get out of it and have somewhat of a restart. I think it should be the same for this, but
sure.
For me, it's more Kavanaugh's character in those hearings that would be why I don't like the guy. I think he is partisan. Yeah. I mean, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think I agree with you that, like, save some really heinous crimes, like, obviously murder, rape, and, if you're the Bill Cosby Weinstein type, yeah, rot in jail. But no, I agree that there should be a way to restitution. But if you look at Kavanaugh's case, he has not suffered the consequence. If we're assuming what he's accused of is true, just for the time being, then that means that he has not actually received any consequences for his actions. He's actually just climbed the ladder to pretty much the top, which is the Supreme Court. So I think that if he was to be like, okay, I want to go down the path of restitution, it would have to start with leaving the Supreme Court. Just like Louis C.K. Now, this is a, very different caliber of importance. But like a Louis C.K. is, yeah, he left comedy for a bit. He took a hiatus of a year. Now he's starting to do clubs here and there and work his way back in. But he had to face. He got a Netflix deal canceled. He got a show canceled, and those are things that, like, yeah, man, those are the consequences of your actions. So for Brett Kavanaugh, sure, maybe he can find his way back into society again and be a benefit to society. But that would have to be after leaving his post of immense power that he gained through not feeling the consequences. Do you understand?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. I think we can both agree on that. There was a guy on Joe Rogan's podcast. I'm not going to say the name just because I don't have it in front of me, but he basically said, and this is the feeling I get with the Me Too movement, though, is that they've driven through the streets and they've won the cultural war, and now they're shooting survivors. And I kind of get that vibe out of parts of this, is that there has been a lot of acts and a lot of action taken against heinous, awful people in the industry that have taken advantage of women and other groups. But now we kind of just seem to be looking for anyone that's done any questionable thing at all, And Brett Kavanaugh, sorry, this is really not for Brett Kavanaugh, because I think you're right. But I think we do need to I think the left in this social movement towards getting people discovered for their actions needs to look in the mirror and think about the repercussions of this.
Yeah, perhaps. And there have been instances where some things have gone too far. In Season Sorry is a good example. But then again, right? Look at the realities. In Season Sorry now has a special on Netflix again, and he's been pretty successful in coming back into society and kind of moving past, acknowledging, but also moving past his faults. So I don't know, man. I think yeah, maybe some people go too far. In the long run though, it's a good thing. It's kind of like the pendulum swing, right? You had for hundreds of years men with power being able to get away with things that were atrocious and awful, and women not being believed. I think the pendulum's swinging the other way, right? And now you have men being held accounted for some of these things. Perhaps in the views of some, the pendulum swung too far. Hopefully it goes back down to the middle and not all the way back to the other side, back to, atrocious acts. I don't know. It's hard to gauge. But I just know personally that if you do your best to, respect women and respect everyone's private space and professionalism, you shouldn't have much to worry about.
Very true. Very true. I think we can agree on that.
Yeah. But that's another rabbit hole we can go down. But yeah, we did want to touch on Kavanaugh. We'll see if this, the book's going to be out. I have to imagine it'll sell somewhat well because people definitely, it's still fresh in everyone's minds that last year's fiery trial. But we'll see if it leads to anything more, new investigations or corroboration. If it does, then we will probably be revisiting this topic.
Yes.
Other than that, any last kind of comments you want to say before we get out of here?
No, I think just note public service announcement to everybody. We'll be off for 2 weeks, and then we'll be back. And I'm sure there's going to be too much for us to cover in one episode, right, Drew?
Yeah, there almost always is.
So yeah, thanks everyone again. We're on YouTube, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Instagram, Podbeam, all at the Tonic Accord.
All right, you heard it there, folks. Take care, and again, we want to hear your feedback. So on any of those platforms, leave a comment, leave a like, and let us know what you think. All right, take care.